All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. This is the Florida Bar Cybersecurity and Privacy Law Committee, a webinar presentation, part of a webinar series that we've been doing here to educate Florida lawyers and anyone else who would like to attend as well, more about issues of cybersecurity and privacy law. And today, very excited about the presentation because we're specifically talking about cyber insurance. Lots of people on our committee have said, Kevin, everyone still needs to know about cyber insurance. We can't just talk about the law every day. But fortunately, insurance law is a favorite topic of Florida lawyers. So we're here to dig into cyber insurance and what it means for law firms, Florida attorneys, what they should know about it. And not only just law firms considering their own cyber insurance, but knowing practitioners are pretty likely to come across clients that may be dealing with cyber insurance and different aspects of it. So, um, very quick, I know we have people that'll still continue joining and trickling in, but I want to go ahead and do a few administrative things. This CLE is eligible for CLE credit through the Florida Bar. That's just available for Florida attorneys. The code is 9259, and I will put that in the chat. And that's just the only code you need to go onto the website and put in for your CLE credit for both general and technology. But that should be enough to go ahead and get us started. So to introduce myself, I've been talking for a little bit, but all I need to say is my name's Kevin Nessledge. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Cybersecurity and Privacy Law Committee. And by background, I've practiced in Florida since I began my legal career. I'm based in Miami. I've done insurance coverage work and some basic privacy practice, but I do now work at a cybersecurity company and help with incident response and resolving cyber incidents, which we'll dig into. And so I still deal with all these privacy lawyers every day. Now, more exciting, the real knowledge that I'm happy they will be able to share. We have Nolan Wilson here from Alliant. He's based in Miami and he is a cyber insurance broker amongst many other things he knows about insurance, but he's going to really have the knowledge that I get people ask me all the time. And he's in the position of assisting people. And I also want to introduce Leonard Leville. He is a claims handler who I've had the chance to work with at times as well. He works at Intact Specialty Insurance Company, and he is a cyber claims handler there. Now, I probably cut you guys both short a little bit. So, Nolan, do you want to say anything else to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Kevin, and it's good to be here today. I guess just a little background. I've been in the insurance industry for about 20 years, mostly on the brokerage side. I did spend a few years on the underwriting side as well, but I've kind of focused on errors and omissions and cyber coverage for the past 10 or 11 years. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Excellent. And Leonard?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure to be here. Yes, my experience includes as a handler, just handling all types of cyber incidents. That's pretty much everything from ransomware all the way down to the most simplest business email compromises. I've been in this space for about a couple of years. Prior experiences include Cowbell Cyber as well as AIG. And prior to cyber, I worked at a firm and I was also a prosecutor in New York City.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. I hope that just that basic understanding puts this audience on the edge of their seat to talk about cyber insurance now. All right, let's go ahead. Just kind of give everyone here an overview. Excuse me. Uh, we're going to be going really more into details. If you've been in some of our other webinars, we talk a lot about possible attacks. I'm not really going to be going into the basic idea that law firms are a target for cyber risk because hopefully you have everyone from every other angle telling you that, whether it's your insurer, whether it's the Florida Bar, or just news articles you see every day. Uh, but we're going to be talking here a little bit more, really insurance being a risk transfer tool and what it looks like to be using that for cyber risk. So, going a little bit more into detail after this, we'll be handing over to Leo a bit to talk about what cyber insurance actually has for insured, going down into the specific coverages, what's there, um, and then taking it back a bit, what you as an applicant or maybe perhaps your client at times should be looking for in cyber insurance, what kind of separates cyber insurers from one or another. Um, and then helping you understand that as well by saying what do underwriters are actually looking at, the people reviewing your application for insurance, what are they looking at to say, okay, your premium goes up or down, and what can they offer? So I really want to dive right into it, and let's get right into it here. First party coverages. Leo, I'm sure a lot of our attorneys are already familiar with the idea of first party and third party coverages, but what does cyber insurance offer? You want to start us off?
Absolutely. So as you can see here on the page, there are cyber insurance. It's split into two separate cover sections within first party. There's first party expenses and there's also first party losses. Now, the one of the things that's most important when it comes to cyber incidents and just reviewing for coverage, any type of incident, is that in every cyber policy, there's going to be in a sentence within the insurance agreement, and that sentence is pretty much going to go something like, "We will cover the reasonable and necessary costs and expenses to investigate and remediate a cyber incident." That sentence has, a couple of trigger words that, is important for attorneys or anyone that's reviewing a claim or helping an insured. Those trigger words are reasonable and necessary costs and expenses, reasonable and necessary. The second trigger word is cyber incident. Reasonable and necessary is important because it's a constant analysis that carriers are constantly doing. Anytime there's a determination or a decision to be made, or anytime a carrier is thinking about making a payment or reimbursing an insured, the first question is this cost, is this expense even reasonable or necessary? And an example I can, talk about and we'll get into a little bit later, is extortion payments, for example. Extortion payment it's a ransomware incident, and we have a threat actor on the other end who's essentially encrypted the insured systems. They've sent a demand for $1 million, and the first thing that a CEO or a high level person at that company would do, they would turn to the adjuster and say, "Hey, we have $1 million policy. The threat actor's asking for $1 million. Let's go ahead and pay the $1 million." That brings us back to reasonable and necessary at that point in time, very early on in the in the incident. It's not necessarily reasonable to pay a threat actor at that point in time. There's definitely steps that we want to take. There's definitely some items that we want to ensure that the threat actor has. We want to make sure that he has capabilities to even decrypt the system, and we'll talk about that later. But that trigger word has to be satisfied. Another trigger word is the cyber incident. That's another trigger word that also has to be satisfied. We get, as handlers, adjusters, we get all types of incidents, and people would try to relate it to a cyber incident, but not every time, or not every time there's a money that's lost or there's an incident that makes it cyber. We would get calls for a social engineering incidents, for example, and that's social engineering is an incident where a hacker maybe hacks into a computer and he tricks someone into sending money to a fraudulent account. That is a cyber incident because the hacker hacking into the computer system or introducing some type of malicious code is what makes it the cyber incident.
So,
And
one thing I'd like to stop here and make sure that I realize I didn't even set this up in the same way for our audience, but I hope the audience is also getting the view that I'm seeing, that I have Nolan on one side and Leo on the other side of me. Uh, but some people here may not be as familiar what the role of the broker is in the insurance sort of landscape. I think people are very familiar with what the insurance company is and the claims adjuster, more or less, which is what Leo's doing. But thinking about how Leo's explaining this, I'd actually let Nolan explain what kind of role and who does the broker represent and whose interests are they covering? Recognizing that you're not an attorney, but you still have.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, so the broker, we work for the client. the policyholder, the person, the company that's buying the insurance. So my role is really just to try and simplify. There's a lot that goes into it, but it's I would say we're representing the buyer of the insurance in the cyber insurance marketplace, and our goal is to negotiate the broadest terms and conditions at the most competitive premium and deductible that we can find in the marketplace. So we may work with, 50, 60, 70 different insurance companies to try and hone in on who is going to provide the most competitive program between all of those things: coverage, pricing, claims handling, deductibles, to really bring forth a cyber insurance program that best fits that particular company.
Perfect. And the reason I kind of stopped us where we were at is because I think this webinar is a great opportunity where, you know, Leo is not here speaking on behalf of his own insurance company or in any sense. We're all trying to give a broad understanding of the insurance landscape, but he usually is sitting in the claims handler seat, and that they often work with brokers, sometimes talking about, okay, what is this coverage that's available here? So given that we have so many lawyers that are participating, we're all kind of comfortable with a little bit of back and forth sometimes on different views that there might be. So, not to put you in the pressure seat, Leah, as you know, but if Nolan has a disagreement, we definitely like hearing that as well along the coverages. But let's go back, really getting into what are the coverages that are triggered by the insuring agreement that you were talking about.
Absolutely. So once the insurance agreement is triggered, we would have first party expenses and first party losses. First party expenses, and we'll get to them. We'll try to get to them, as quick as we can. But they would include breach counsel costs, digital forensics incident response costs, restoration costs, extortion payments, as well as any public relations costs that an insured may want to avail themselves of. Now, first party losses would include business income loss, as well as any extra expenses that the insured incurred to stop further business loss from happening.
Well, I think the breach counsel is the one where a lot of this gets started. We can go ahead and dive into that.
Hey, can I just jump in real quick here, Kevin?
Or
I don't know if you want to flip back real quick. It might make it easier, but Leo talked about reasonable and necessary, which is a very common phrase in the policies. We may be getting to this later, but I wanted to mention it here at least, that I would say almost every single cyber insurance policy is going to include a list of law firms, so like the breach counsel, and other cyber incident response vendors, including all of the forensics, restoration, extortion negotiators. So the policy automatically includes access to a predetermined list of vendors and law firms that the insurance company has already negotiated rates with. So you automatically have access to those panel firms. So generally, you can think that most of those expenses are going to be reasonable and necessary, so long as it triggers the cyber incident that Leo mentioned. I think where we've seen companies and our clients get into trouble is that if they utilize a law firm or a forensics company that is not included on the insurance company panel, and then they say, we have an incident, we need to respond right away. They engage that firm. They are incurring costs of $500 or $1,000 an hour. The insurance company has not approved that. And then after the incident is done, the client says, here, insurance company, here's all our invoices. Can you please pay this? And the insurance company says, well, our panel charges $300 an hour. You were having costs at $1,000 an hour. We're not going to pay this. So I only mention it because there's two things to do there. And it is, when it comes to claims issues, this is one of the top items that we see is that the insurance company has not approved expenses in advance. So as long as you reach out to the insurance company and say, hey, we want to use XYZ firm, they can say yes or no, we'll pay half of it, we'll pay our customary rates. But where we get into trouble is where we've seen clients incur costs and then go back later and the insurance company says, I didn't approve this. And the costs are a lot higher than what our expert firms that we've already negotiated with would be. And therefore, then we have
Yep.
an argument on our hands.
And to tie that into, a lot of this comes up in litigation and other areas of insurance. It's truly the issue of notice. It comes into, did you notify your insurance company quickly about this event happening? And while Florida attorneys, you might be really used to the hurricanes and saying like, well, it's not like you notify your insurance carrier about a property damage as the hurricane's happening or something like that. But cyber insurance is very much, you should have an incident response plan, which is a plug for the Florida Bar is recommending this. Our committee has pushed this forward, and there's a recommendation by the Florida Bar that law firms should have incident response plans, and your cyber insurance should be in there. Contact information for how to notify them. They all have 24/7 response, so you can notify them right away. So what Nolan was saying too, they have panel counsel that they often work with, or you've already talked with them ahead of time about who you would work with. So they're often referred to as breach counsel, or some people would not like to use the term breach because you don't want to presuppose there's a breach. So Nolan, or no, Leo, go ahead and tell us what the breach counsel does. That
It's true. That is a very good point. Oftentimes, insured would call and say that we have a data breach. It's a legal term that we definitely want to see certain things before we want to label it as a breach. But just talking about the vendors and talking about breach counsel first, breach counsel is probably one of the most important vendors that you can have on a cyber incident. Breach counsel is essentially quarterback the entire claim. They pass information over to forensics, to insurance, and us. And most importantly, as you'll see down there in the purpose, their role is to satisfy all of the insured's legal obligations. So that includes, identifying the affected individuals, drafting notice letters, notifying affected parties, responding to governmental inquiries, and providing a security incident report afterwards. So essentially, what does all of that mean? It means that anytime there is a data breach or a suspected data breach, a cyber incident, and a company holds information that's sensitive in nature for individuals, and those individuals could be employees, customers, clients, vendors, whomever. If that information gets accessed by an unauthorized party, or it's believed that it was accessed by an unauthorized party, what it does is it triggers state and federal laws that have been set in place. And essentially, those laws say that you, as the company, you have to notify those individuals. And that's where breach counsel comes into play. Because if you're a company and there's thousands of individuals or customers, and they reside in different locations, you would have to abide by the data breach laws in the states where those individuals reside. Now, breach counsel essentially would handle all of those obligations for the insured. So whether it be state or federal laws, whether it's contractual obligations, that would be breach counsel's role. And as we can see here to the right, the data breach statistics from 2011 to 2020, we can see that data breach has essentially multiplied times 8, right, from the orange line, and then the blue line shows the number of records that has been exposed. So with records being exposed and information being sensitive in nature, that only highlights the growing importance of breach counsel on these cyber incidents.
I like the term I've used a lot of times, quarterback that you said, or really like a guide, because especially if your law firm is, or your client's firm or someone else is experiencing a data breach, it's a crisis scenario. And bringing in someone who can really put everyone to make in the right direction, making sure they're going, efforts are being uh, exerted in the right direction is extremely helpful. And who's been through this plenty of times that they see the pitfalls you can enter when you're not going the right direction. I've had the opportunity to see firms at times that proceed through an incident response without counsel, and yeah, they are not taking legal advice and they usually get themselves into trouble. But let's there's several other components who could be involved. I think maybe the other big one that we want to hit, Leo, is the digital forensics incident response firm.
Absolutely. Also known as DFIR. Some insurers or people also call them IR, the IR team. but they are never the IT team, right? And that's the distinction I think that we as handlers essentially always make to the insured. Is that the person essentially that's in the office that the insured has is IT that essentially connects computers, monitors, other peripherals, things like that, is separate from the person that would come in and run a forensic investigation for a cyber incident. And just diving a little bit deeper into what DFR does, as we see down here, their main three roles. First is initial containment. If there's a threat actor or there's some type of malware or there's unauthorized individuals in an insured's network, the first point of attack, or essentially the first work stream for a DFIR team to do would be to do initial containment, figure out what's going on. Is it a ransomware incident? Is it pre-ransomware? Are any files encrypted? Is this something that came, or where did it essentially come from? And then that's where we'll talk about the entry vector. And then lastly, what we have is identifying the extent of access. One of the most important things for a DFR firm to do is to work hand in hand with breach counsel by using logs or using the information that they have at their fingertips to figure out what did this threat actor access. Because as we talked about before, any files or anything that's sensitive in nature that the DFR team finds out that the threat actor access, that gets reported over to breach counsel, who then makes a determination if notifications has to be provided.
And let's just go right over to restoration and extortion payment.
These two go in hand because the way in which we would do restoration de depends on if we had to do an extortion payment. And that's the analysis that's essentially done every time there is a ransomware incident. And that's where we get the first two bullet points. The number one question, if there's a ransomware incident or if the insured system is encrypted, is are there backups? Are there viable backups? And how soon or how recent are those backups? Because if the insured has backups and they're able to essentially restore their data, then we can essentially, wipe all of their servers and reboot from backups. We wouldn't have to pay an extortion in that scenario. Another scenario would be the data and whether it's sensitive in nature. There are times, and Kevin could speak to this as well, but there are times that even if an insured is sophisticated and they have backups, possibly the data that the threat actor has taken or that they have exfiltrated and they're now threatening to release to the public, that data could be sensitive in nature. And if the insured is a law firm, or if they're a school that holds sensitive information for their students, or a business that has private confidential contracts, that simply just having backups may not be enough for them to waive or forego paying the extortion. We still may be in a position to go ahead and pay that extortion. So if one of the first two bullet points falls through, if there are no backups, or if the data that we're talking about is in fact sensitive in nature, we would then move on to the third bullet point, where we make sure that the TA is not on a sanction list, such as Lockbit, and then we open up communications with the TA. We look at historical data. We see what this threat actor has commonly settled for in the past, and if we have from historical data that says this threat actor commonly settles for 50%, then what we would do in that sense, if the initial demand is 100,000, then we would know 50,000 is essentially what they're looking for. We would, make our initial offer, at about 20 or 15,000, just to give an example.
And
And
I
then
wanted to dig in here a little bit because this will be good with Nolan and Leonard and myself even to see all these different sides. I work at a cybersecurity company that's could fall into that DFIR category, or we also do restoration. These are the type of vendors that exist in this space. And then as well as you specifically, there's usually one company or service that's providing uh, the service of communicating with threat actors. And so that's something where we're talking about the extortion. The insurance company is approving all of this being done. But let's talk about the actual question of a ransom being paid. Who's, I know I asked this to both of you because I have my thoughts, everyone has their thoughts. Who's making the decision on paying a ransom or paying an extortion in exchange for either suppressing data or a decryptor? Nolan, you
I,
want to start? Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I can start. I mean, to me, I think it's a decision by both the client and the insurance company. So I think that in some respects, the cyber extortion and the ransom payments are covered under the insurance policy, but they do require the insurance company to approve those payments before they're going to be covered by the insurance. So you do need to get the sign off of the insurance company. And to do that, I think you need to establish that you don't have the backups, like you are suffering a harm, and payment by this will relieve that. Um, so it could be a variety of different individuals at the buyer of the insurance. I'm just calling that the client. So between the client and then the insurance adjuster, I think they make those decisions together. And all the insurance companies will, like Kevin said, they use different vendors that can help facilitate the payment. Like if it's going to be in cryptocurrency of some sort, then there's companies that the insurance company partners with that has access to the cryptocurrency and can facilitate that. Um,
Yeah. And so I'll ask kind of Leo the same question here. Um, Recognizing you're not speaking on behalf of Intact and their insurance policy language or even previous employers, because I'm asking in general with this, the way you see it in the marketplace, like how does that call get made in terms of whether an extortion is paid?
Right. I would agree with Nolan's answer. Just to piggyback a little bit, definitely there needs to be an agreement with the insured and the carrier, right? We would have to be on the same page. And from the carrier side, to get to the point where we believe extortion payment should be considered, we definitely, number one, would need to know and understand that backups are not viable. Number two, we would want to make sure, or we would understand the data that we're talking about in question. Is that data, sensitive? Is it something that definitely cannot be published? It would harm the company's reputation. There would be a further loss that would come from it. That's a consideration that's made. Now, after we get past those 2 points, we start negotiating with the threat actor. And if the insured systems are encrypted, there are further assurances that we definitely want from the threat actor. Number one, we want to make sure that this threat actor can actually decrypt the insured systems that is currently encrypted. So oftentimes what we would do is we would send some data over to the threat actor, and we would have them prove that they have the capabilities to decrypt that encrypted data. And the threat actor, as you can see on the right, these boxes here are essentially chats that insureds would come in and see on their computer screen once all of their systems are encrypted. As you can see on the two boxes there, essentially there would just be a note that says, all of your files have been encrypted. Come to this site and chat with us if you want your documents or your files to be released.
Well,
So
I wasn't actually expecting as much agreement between you two, so I had kind of hoped for spicier engagement. But I'll throw out something that gets seen sometimes is that it's really truly at the core of insurance sometimes. Once in a while, an insured that's dealing with a ransomware scenario, they're just kind of in that panic mode and seeing everything is encrypted. Like, just pay them whatever they need to get me back up and running. It's preventing me from being at a law firm. It's preventing any of our attorneys from being able to bill. Like, how are we supposed to keep going? Just pay the ransom. You're my insurer, pay it. And what trying to put on my very neutral hat, well, maybe not neutral because I've mostly worked for insurers at times, but an insurance policy is always looking for reasonableness, like we've talked to. So I always say it kind of comes down to math. If you're seeing that it's costing your company this much money, which potentially would be covered by the insurance policy, an insurance company will always answer to money. If they're going to have to pay you back millions of dollars and the ransom is 1 million, that might seem pretty reasonable as a business decision to them. So there's a lot of those can be tense disputes at times, and it's not like a property claim or something that you can debate for 2 years down the road, because it's a decision's having to be made immediately on it. But I want to make sure we move on. That's very, and everyone can talk about extortions all day.
Well, Kevin, somebody asked a question in the chat about who does the negotiation with the threat actor.
Oh yeah.
And I know, like, I've had conversations with your colleagues in the past about, you hear so much about ransom being a prevalent exposure when it comes to cyber insurance. And I think it's a headline thing. Like
Mhm.
when there's a really big event that's paid and we find out about it, it makes the headlines. I think about a lot of the examples we have coming up are going to be related to ransomware. But it's also true, from what I understand, that the negotiation with the threat actors is oftentimes it's very well known in advance. So if you have a particular threat actor group, you may know that, okay, these guys usually come out and ask for $1 million, but they'll settle for 30% less or 70% less, and they do so within a specific time period. There's kind of a cadence for how these threat actors are running their business, and there's also I think what makes the headlines and what I have trouble getting to the bottom of with the insurance companies that I work with, they often are reporting the demanded amount and not the paid amount. So to me, like as I'm trying to negotiate better terms, I'm thinking of like, okay, what did the insurance company actually pay, not what did the threat actor demand? So I don't know, maybe you can answer those questions about who's
Yeah,
that negotiating.
and this is the question was who does the negotiating? It's usually a separate company, a company specifically hired to communicate with the threat actor. It's usually like on the dark web or through an email address. Uh, but you would pay an extortion for one of two things. One is a decryptor, and that's if your systems are encrypted and none of the other options which have been talked about. And that's where time is much more not on your side because you need to get back up and running as quickly. And it leaves, as anyone would know, when you do not have time on your side, you do not have as much leverage in a negotiation. Now, on the other hand, if it's just a question, but a question of your data being stolen and it not being published on the dark web, then there's a lot more time to negotiate usually. And I think sometimes you see like 2 weeks to a month can be a sweet spot for it, and it gives you a chance to negotiate down, using a lot of those different factors there.
Just
Um,
to add to that, definitely the one company would step in and, they would read, such as you see in the boxes there on the right, they would find out exactly where to go to chat with the threat actor. But as far as, who's telling that company, what to say or what to respond to the threat actor, that effort is a collaborative effort as well. From what I've seen, that's the handler with breach counsel, the insured and forensics essentially, you know, on an email thread and agreeing what we will be responding or replying to the threat actor.
um, well, I know it's really easy to get caught in talking about extortions, but I want to make sure we cover some of these other insurance topics we have that are really important. Um, oh, I don't know why my slides are going backwards. There we go. Real quick, this one's pretty uncommon, but Leo, you want to explain just a couple more of these coverages that are available?
Or yes, public relations. So most cyber policies also contain a public relations or crisis management coverage. And essentially what that means is any time an insured, goes through a cyber incident, they feel that their reputation is taking a hit. They can definitely avail themselves of public relations work streams where, they would have professionals come in, they would sit down, talk to them, and if advertising or marketing needs to go out, that's something that the insurance would cover as well.
Okay. And this is a big topic here that we could have a totally another webinar on, but just maybe briefly explain business interruption or business income and extra expenses.
Okay, so in a nutshell, during the cyber incident, it's understood that the insured is losing income because they're not operating to 100% capacity. They're not generating the same level of revenue. They're not making the same level of net gains. So essentially, the argument or the claim from the insured is, because of this cyber incident or because of this ransomware, I've lost, 500,000 or so. So this is another area or coverage section that cyber policies would often cover for insureds, and it would be in the form of a business income and extra expense coverage.
Yeah. And Nolan, do you have a way you describe it in a nutshell to clients? Because frankly, it is complicated, and insurers find it complicated as well, but it's very important.
Yeah, I usually refer to the business interruption, basically a loss or theft, or so a loss of income or extra expenses related to trying to maintain your normal operating levels. So either of those two things, the loss of income and extra expenses, as already said, tied to a covered cyber incident of the policy. Most of the time, those things are all the same. But yeah, if there's a cyber incident that results in a loss of income or extra expenses, that's kind of a high level of business interruption.
And frankly, the way this, an important element of this coverage is that it exists because an insurance company knows that business income losses can get very large quickly if not properly mitigated. And so they are incentivized to be helping you as much with the other first party coverages to make sure that they're avoiding this one from getting larger. So it's actually a way that, it kind of incentivizes the insurer to work in your favor. Now, I really only want to hit this light at the moment because we've had other webinars on this topic, but explain how the coverage this is implicated here.
Here we
Uh,
have third-party coverage. Here's an incident where, if there's a ransomware, and then we find out there's an affected party or parties, they're provided notices. Essentially, every individual that receives a notice can turn around and be a plaintiff in a class action lawsuit or a lawsuit against the insured for failure to maintain, their information securely or safely. So essentially, every time when we have a data breach, and that's why we have the note there on the bottom, we definitely want to only be in a mindset of only notifying the individuals that have to be notified based on data breach laws, because every extra individual essentially opens the insured up to further liability.
yeah. Well, and again, it's a topic we can go through endlessly, but it's another coverage, just like the business income coverage, because an cyber insurer is responsible for paying for your defense and settlement and indemnity for a data breach. They're incentivized to minimize the data breach as much as possible because eventually, once those notices of an event get sent out, likely people will hire a plaintiff's attorney or a class action will be formed. It's very common to see that lawsuit come after that. Now, we're going to be kind of switching minds as we're talking all about the coverages that are available, but really shifting to what Nolan can provide us here. What do we want to look for in a cyber insurer for someone who's shopping for insurance?
Yeah, so I think there's a handful of things to be concerned with. I mean, most of them are listed out here, but um, depending on if you're working with a large broker, generally they're going to have minimum requirements for the financial strength of an insurance company, which is really the ability of that company to pay. And there's so many reputable cyber insurance companies out there that are looking to write cyber insurance at competitive terms, that you really wouldn't need to settle for a company that is, not of a certain level. And you have AM Best and S&P ratings um, that list the financial strength of the different companies. So that's certainly one thing. Yeah, and the claims reputation. That's something that we talk about with clients all the time, especially when if they're gonna make a move from one insurance company to another. Our team, we have a separate claims team, a claim advocacy team, and we work with the Leos of the world and all of the different claims adjusters and lawyers that are at the different insurance companies when we're negotiating back and forth on different claims settlements or if a policy should or shouldn't respond. So I think some insurers are definitely more flexible and maybe more commercial in how they're going to respond to a potentially gray area. Because I think it is the case that if you're consistently have an insurance company that is very tied to the letter of the policy wording, no issues there. But I think that would also translate probably to brokers placing less less coverage and less policies going forward with the insurance company. So the insurance companies know that, and they want to be commercial and competitive, not only from the terms and conditions, but also from the reputation that they have on claims payments. Um, I think the other things you look for, the terms and conditions of the policy. I think the policies like 5 or 6 years ago, we would really be saying these companies are not, or these policies have to be negotiated and tailored, and they still do. But I think all of the insurance companies have kind of caught up. So there is a kind of minimum baseline standardization on the policy wording that has become pretty good compared to where it was when these policies were first being written, and you had variants all over the board. So I think that's gotten better, but on every single policy that I'm placing, I'm negotiating additional enhancements, changes to the language. I mean, we're working with our claims team. So if we do go through a scenario with a client where a claim is not covered because of some policy wording, going forward with that insurance company, we look to amend that to ensure a similar loss would be covered. So it's just a constant evolution. A claim comes in, it's covered or not covered. If it's not, we look to see how can we get that covered going forward by amending the wording. And then, based on the industry, like, mostly speaking with people that are at law firms here, there are insurance companies that are more aggressive and want to write law firms more than other things like retail or healthcare or manufacturing. It depends a lot on the claims experience that they have. So I think what you should be looking for as a buyer of insurance are those insurance companies that are going to be the most competitive for your specific business. And then, of course, the pricing and the deductibles and retentions and other policy terms, things like that. We talked about a little bit earlier when it comes to claims and having the panel firms. Some insurance companies are a lot more strict about utilizing an off-panel firm than others. So if you're a company that wants to use your own law firm or your own cybersecurity vendors in responding to an incident, you need to make sure that the policy offers you that flexibility so you don't get into an argument down the road. And some carriers are more flexible in adding, you can get them added by endorsement to make sure that it's covered at the time of an incident rather than negotiating it at that incident. That's kind of the preferred method so that everybody knows in advance about who is and is not approved to utilize. And you just get a variance about who's going to approve what at different rates. We can get some companies to agree to $1,500 an hour rate and others that won't agree to more than 500. So I'll pause there.
No, this is great. And Nolan, I'm so thankful to have you here because often, maybe just with this committee, we're in spaces that are just lawyers. And I'm always like, talk to a good broker, talk to a good broker. Like they are seeing this market every day, which made me think, saying market, can you just explain to the audience here what soft markets and hard markets are in insurance?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know why we call it that necessarily, but
Neither.
yeah. So a hard market, we're generally referring to the insurance companies that are deploying the capacity are pulling back and they're restricting the terms. So a hard market is a less favorable environment for the buyers of insurance and arguably more favorable for the insurance company. So in a hard market, you are likely to see one or more of the following: increases in pricing, increases in your deductibles or retentions, more exclusions on the policy, a reduction in the limits that are deployed by any one insurance company. So a handful of years ago, everybody would be fine deploying $10 million in limits on any one account. And we did have a hard market that coincided with the pandemic, that the insurers really pulled back and people didn't want to deploy more than 5 million. So also adding sublimits into the policy. So right now, if let's say you buy a $5 million policy, during a hard market, the insurance companies may say, you client have a big exposure for ransom events or business interruption. So instead of having a $5 million limit for cyber ransom payments, you're only going to have a $2.5 million limit. So overall, it's a big restriction on the terms and conditions that are issued by the insurance company. Soft market, just the opposite. A really favorable environment, lots of competition. It's just kind of supply and demand. Soft market, lots of supply that is not meeting up with demand. Therefore, carriers, which is that's the market we're in right now. I'd call it a very soft market. Premiums are coming down, very competitive. You get a lot of insurance companies that are looking to um, to participate and write different accounts. They have, um, generally really high goals as far as writing new business. So that just increases our ability to negotiate broader coverage, eliminating sublimits so you have full limits, lower retentions, all good things. So it's kind of hard market, bad, good soft market, good for the buyers of insurance.
Oh, and I'll point the an interesting thing about this that ties into what underwriters are looking for in our next slide is a soft market means an increased competition amongst the insurers, and so they what you would say generally an insurer wants to see high level of security controls on their insured. You're a good insured, you're not risky. But the sort of disadvantage maybe on the whole cybersecurity world of things is in a soft market, an insurer might be saying, all right, you're riskier, but it's a competitive market, so we're willing
That's
to.
right.
And there's this separate almost argument is to say, like, in a hard market, it's good for cybersecurity as a country or as a whole because insurers are coming down and saying, like, put on your heavy hurricane windows. Like, we need all this security to make sure you're not losing, but we're in a soft market. So what are underwriters looking for right now? Well, I don't even say right now. What do underwriters look for in cyber applications?
Yeah, all those things. I mean, that's a really good point that you just mentioned because I think in a soft market you do see maybe more flexibility on the amount of information or the controls that you want to have in place because the carriers are really trying to write more business. So right now, I mean, I think the application process has become a little bit more standard. I know a lot of clients kind of they're not looking forward to filling out a cyber application because it can often include a lot of questions and they're very specific to IT security. So, unless you have an IT security team filling out the responses, it can be difficult to get those answers. And sometimes they can be a little bit lengthy. But yeah, I mean, all the things mentioned here, I think, MFA and endpoint detection, and there's a handful, incident response plans, making sure that you're doing employee training. You've done some tabletop exercises to test your plan and to test a potential cyber scenario. Um, all of those things I think are what the insurance companies are looking for. There is a bit of a delineation if you're a smaller company and this is based on revenue. So if you're under like let's say 100 million in revenue, I think the expectation to have amazing controls is not there like you would like if you're JP Morgan and they have 500 people on their information security team. There's a lot higher expectations for the controls that are in place. But I think some of the things that are here that are mentioned there's definitely uh, we're trying to improve the minimum security standards that are required in order to obtain insurance, just like you would see with like a car. If you want car insurance, the car better have seatbelts and it better have a steering wheel and it's going to have airbags. I think we're trying to move that way, more slowly since cyber is more new, but trying to implement those minimum controls. So I will say that the what enables us as the broker to get the best result is to provide a comprehensive and complete submission. Because if you don't provide all the information, then the underwriters, as they're looking at the program, they sort of lean to the more conservative approach on what the responses would be from the client about what controls are in place. So a more conservative underwriting approach typically does not yield as competitive pricing and terms and conditions. So the the broader and more comprehensive underwriting submission we can send out to the market, the more insurance companies we can get interested in your risk. The more insurance companies that are interested, it just increases our leverage to negotiate all the things that I talked about before on pricing, deductibles, coverage, vendors, all of those things. So, um,
Yeah, all of these topics we've had so far, we could really dive really deep into. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is move towards some of the wrap up points we have, because then we'll move into Q&A because we do have some good pending questions that we've had come in. But I'd like to just hit some points before we move into even a broader Q&A time. Um, really trying to dive in on what this means for law firms. I think thinking about cyber insurance, it's such an important factor because of the risks that law firm have. They have really sensitive data. I was saying in one of my prior roles, I've been claims handlers, and some of the most complicated breaches were always with law firms. If they have lost client data, it involves their ethical duties of notifying clients, and there's a whole professional responsibility side. If we dove into that much more, we could have gotten ethics credits for the CLE, but there's a large exposure to law firms from that angle. But then also, suppose you really do have sensitive data, not just and not to minimize health data, but most firms have some sort of health documents, whether they're personal injury firms, um, just dealing with medical issues and problems, and that, does have notification obligations. But even more sensitive stuff, like there's lots of NDAs out there that might have liquidated damages clauses. Um, that's a pretty damaging if that gets out on the dark web. And or even if you're just holding information for larger clients, such as, the Targets of the world, Walmart, not even just retailers, but other large institutions, they have their own security teams that are scanning the dark web all the time to see if, someone did lose information, what information is out there, and does this implicate us in any way? So it's very important, thinking about your own cybersecurity strategies at a law firm. And cyber insurance could be a really important component of I'm sure Nolan deals with clients all the time, so they're wrestling this question, do I spend this money investing in my cybersecurity program, or do I invest some in cyber insurance? How much is the appropriate limits? I mean, there is a whole equation, and that's why working with your insurance agent or a good broker can help you determine what makes sense for your scenario. Um, but then here, this will kind of lead us into some of the Q&A, but these points on the screen here, contractual obligations you might have to have cyber insurance. This is becoming much more and more common with insurance contractual agreements you may have with clients or with vendors to say you must carry this much cyber insurance, getting insurance certificates, going through that whole process as well. And then not just the insurance component, but requirements of what cybersecurity controls you have in place at your law firm as a prerequisite to doing business. These are just contractual terms that are becoming much more and more common. Um, again, we're kind of approaching the top of the hour, but let's say before we go into Q&A, Leo or Nolan, are there final points you'd like to say sort of on what we're sharing? I realize we hit a lot of topics and I think it was extremely useful. Or we can dive into questions.
Yeah, I think this is a good way to, unless if Nolan has anything further, but we talked about law firms. I was trying my best to answer the questions that were coming in the background, but there is a question about social engineering from a law firm point of view, especially a real estate law firm that we can
Mhm.
address.
Yeah, I think that's great. Let's maybe for our whole audience set this up as a scenario. Law firms handle a lot of money. They deal with clients who are sending a lot of money. Maybe you guys can help explain, okay, your email account got hacked and instructed your client to pay the wrong vendor. It was a fake account and sent the $1 million in a wrong direction. How does cyber insurance work in that scenario?
Yes, and then this is the example that we have, that same exact example. If it's a law firm, let's say a real estate law firm, and they were tricked into maybe sending money to a fake title company, and it actually went to a fraudulent account. So this type of incident is known as social engineering. That specific type of coverage has to be within the cyber policy. Sometimes we see it's selected, sometimes it's not. Maybe Nola can talk about like the differences in premiums and things like that. But when it is selected, and we do have social engineering coverages, we often see two different types. And just to cover what type of incident it would cover essentially any time anyone in the insured's office is tricked or they're duped into sending money to a fraudulent account. And as Kevin mentioned earlier, the threat actor, the bad actor, they're essentially in the insured's email tenant, and they could be there for weeks, months, and then they're learning your system, they're learning your pattern, they're learning what they have to do in order to to send funds to themselves. So if they see an email from account or from the CEO to accounting, and it says, "Hey, pay this invoice," and they see that multiple times, what they'll do is they'll spoof the CEO's email tenant. They'll pretend to be the CEO. They'll send a message to accounting, and they'll say, "Hey, pay this invoice. Just use this new routing and account number," and then that money goes to a fraudulent account. Now,
So
if
is
you
that
have
covered? That's what everyone always wants to know, though. Is it
right,
covered?
so if you
A
have
million
social
dollars that's lost and not there anymore.
if you have that coverage, right? Because you can have cybersecurity coverage, but then not have that specific social engineering coverage that wouldn't be covered. You would need to have specifically social engineering coverage. And the two types that we're seeing essentially a full blanket social engineering coverage where it doesn't matter what you did, you'll be covered as long as there was a cyber incident that led you to be duped into sending money to the fraudulent account. Uh, at the same time, we also see certain conditions that the insured would have to satisfy. There are certain conditions that we see, such as, was there some type of rule or procedure that was in place for any time an employee at the insured's office, receives new payment information, such as, is there a phone call, that gets made to the person that sent you that email? Is there any other way to try and verify the information that you receive? That's the other type of social engineering coverage that we're seeing. But
Well, no, I want
if
to
you have that,
specify the nomenclature there because it's something that's almost kind of annoying about insurance. It's called social engineering coverage in some cases. Social engineering is way more used as the term of what threat actors do to trick people, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with the insurance coverage. Social engineering could just refer to what a threat actor is doing to steal your credentials to get in. And so it is very much an insurance specific type term, but at least what I see, and I would ask Nolan if he agrees here, the larger market is if there's a loss that is a threat actor got in your environment, which resulted in money being transferred, especially in lawyers' case in trust accounts. That's usually excluded. But if there's a monetary loss that's not necessarily to do with trust accounts, sometimes there's sublimated coverage. If you have $1 million policy, perhaps there's $100,000 in coverage. This is a question where it's much more in the details. Nolan, agree or disagree on that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. So the way I think about, we call it a lot of different things. You're right. So if you look at a cyber insurance policy, you might see social engineering, you might see invoice fraud, you might see fraudulent transfer of funds, something that ties back to the loss or theft of funds, which is generally not the intent of what a cyber policy provides coverage for. So the different buckets that could be covered under cyber, and every policy is different in this respect, is, let's say the insured is tricked into sending its own money. The insured is tricked into sending its client's money. A financial institution of the insured is tricked into sending the insured's money, or the insured's client is tricked into making a fraudulent payment to the insured. So there's a lot of different buckets of loss that could occur. And some insurance, some cyber insurance policy will cover all four of those things. Some will only cover one. So that is definitely one area that still has a lot of variability. I think in general, the cyber insurance marketplace is going to provide $250,000 in coverage for this type of scenario. Some policies are going to be 100,000, some might be 500,000. In some cases, we've probably got some larger accounts that have a much larger deductible. They may have $1 million in coverage. But I think the point that we typically make is that from a frequency perspective, this is probably one of the biggest claims that we're seeing. This fraudulent transfer of fund, the wiring money to the wrong party, changing vendor instructions, and money goes out and it's not found out until a month later when the vendor says, "Hey, we never got our money." So one is you want to make sure you have controls in place to do training and to prevent this. And a lot of the policy language will also say, it will have like this verification clause in the policy language that says, if you want it to be covered, you have to pick up the phone and verify with another party, which is kind of like the airline saying that they'll replace my broken golf clubs, but only if I use a hard case that can't be broken. So it's kind of BS, but there is a big variance. And the important thing here is that there's loss scenario, the loss or theft of funds, can also be covered under a crime policy or a fidelity policy.
Mm.
Somebody actually asked about this in the chat. Um, and so that the crime marketplace can provide broader coverage for the scenarios that I mentioned, as well as higher limits. So cyber is generally going to be $250,000. Crime can be much higher. There's also different social engineering products where you can buy 10 or $15 million in limits if you want it. It is expensive. The last point I want to mention here is that because the crime policies can provide this coverage, you need to make sure that you're coordinating the other insurance clause between the cyber and the crime in order to maximize the recovery that you as the client have available for your overall insurance policies, because you don't want to have coverage under your cyber or have coverage under your crime, but the cyber policy pays, it's a lower retention deductible, and then the crime policy is saying we're not going to pay because your cyber policy paid, and then
And
maybe you
malpractice
miss out
as
on some
well,
coverage. Yeah.
right?
So there's a lot of coordinating to do within that.
Yeah. And I've seen that too, where the malpractice carrier, because the lawyer, if they did miswire the funds, it likely was their duty that they breached, and you could see a malpractice suit because of that. But then there might be restrictions in your malpractice insurance about funds transfer. Well, we're at the top of the hour, and I really appreciate all the questions that are here, and we did not have time to answer them all. And I do want to make sure that okay, I saw that people that asked for Nolan's email address got it, because I thought that I could send a chat to the entire group here, but I don't have that ability. But if you need to reach out to him, I'm sure you can message him on LinkedIn or find him that way. Or Nolan, I don't know if you want to share your email. And then,
Yeah, I don't mind. It's just my name, nolan.wilson@alliant.com. ALLIANT.
yeah. And both Leonard and myself, you can find us on the Florida Bar's website as well if you want to follow up with questions. We will be continuing this webinar series, really diving into incident response plans more. But for me, this was one of the most fun ones to get to be involved with, because cyber insurance is what I get to deal with almost every day and find it a blast. So again, thank you so much, Nolan and Leo, for being here, and thank you for all those that attended. You should have seen when you signed up that the course number for this is 9259. That's the number. There's no authorization codes or anything that you have to do, just that number at the Florida Bar's website. So thank you so much for attending, everyone, and that wraps us up for today.
Thanks all. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.